Coming to Yangon was in itself a very meaningful experience, because it seemed it was the first stage of our march to India, and all the units were collected here and were grouping, and the first guerrilla regiment under General Shanawaz had already left for the front, so there was a lot of excitement here. And in addition, at that time the British had started bombing in Burma, but it was not very severe, but we used to get the occasional alarm, and so it somehow brought the war nearer together, and it was most important that we did vigorous training and were ready to go to the front. So all these factors were very inspiring, and in addition I got very good recruits for the Rani of Jhansi regiment here. Then I told Netaji that the camp we were in was not a proper one and was not sufficient for any expansion. So then I went around looking at sites, and there was a place in Kamayut. So I felt that would be more suitable, and arrangements were made for shifting the camp there. And then I went back to Singapore. And when I got to Singapore, I was very happy, because Janaki and about 15 other young girls had proved very efficient in their initial training, and they were sent for further higher training to the Officers Training Institute, which had been set up in Singapore. They used to go there every morning, attend to lectures and whatever else was, and in the evening they used to come back to the camp. And I got very good reports of them from the officers of the training institute. They were saying that these girls are doing very well. They have already grasped the elements of warfare, and they were proving a great success. And it was at this time that we also had our first practice on the firing range. And I'm afraid I was myself a very poor shot, but Janaki and quite a number of the others, not only those who had undergone officers training, but some of the ordinary recruits, they proved to be very good shots, and the Japanese used to come to watch, and they were most impressed, and so they said, "Oh, India, girl soldier, very good, very good," because before that they had been most skeptical about the whole thing and tried to discourage Netaji as far as possible from forming this regiment and then sending them to the front. But when they saw their marksmanship and their smart bearing and the way they paraded and all that, they were also quite impressed. Then after that, at the end of January or beginning of February, I went back again to Rangoon, and then the arrangements were practically complete for the moving the camp from Tinganju to Kamayut. And by that time there were over 200 recruits in the Rangoon camp. So I used to train with them, and along with that I had to attend to many official functions along with Netaji. And I also had to attend several meetings with the Indian community. And as the majority here, as in Malaysia, were from South India, I could communicate easier with them in Tamil and sometimes in Malayalam. But unfortunately I didn't know Bengali. But all the Bengalis were happy when they heard Netaji, and they already wanted to meet him. And in addition to the volunteers of the Rani of Jhansi regiment, we also organized a women's group in among the Indian women in Yangon, and one section of them started making things like shakarpara and all, which could be kept for rations for the troops, and this jaggery and peanut toffee, they also made those, and they collected lots of bottles and made bandages and things for our hospital. So we got practically every Indian in Yangon was somehow or other involved in the activities of the INA. Then I went back once more to Singapore, and then in March, Netaji moved his headquarters from Rangoon to Memio, which is above Mandalay. And then he said that the first group of Rani of Jhansi Regiment should also move up, because from there we were planning the march on Imphal. So I went up there in March, and we stayed there, but unfortunately the attack on Imphal didn't come because we had to retreat due to the monsoon which has started. It was very heavy and complete breakdown in the transportation system, on which we were dependent mainly on the Japanese. But on our side we used to hire bullock carts, but due to the heavy monsoon and the roads all becoming oceans of slush, the bullock carts couldn't move on those roads, so we were very bogged down. And then due to the heavy rain and lack of medicines and lack of proper food, many of our troops got very ill. They suffered from dysentery, malaria, even typhus, and altogether they were in a bad condition. So when we got this information, a group of doctors came up from Rangoon, and we decided there was an old school that we would convert that into a hospital. And for nursing staff, I said Rani of Jhansi Regiment, since they were not engaged in any other duty, they should work as nurses. And so I used to give them lectures in first aid and ordinary simple nursing. And then it happened that a rush of patients came from the front, and before we knew where we were, we had hundreds of patients admitted. Some had very bad wounds. A lot of them were just suffering from malnutrition, dehydration, and things like malaria and all that. And we had such a shortage of any kind of drugs. But somehow, I must say, these girls especially, they worked round the clock. And the fact of there being some nurses and people to soothe them, to talk to them and all that, had a great impact on the morale of these poor soldiers who had suffered such a lot. And we also felt very satisfied that we were doing some work and not just sitting and waiting for the orders to march or something like that. So that was a big part of our operations there. But even at this time, we used to keep up with our military training. We used to go for long road marches through the jungles, and we used to have other operations also along with the INA troops who were there. And we did one long route march right from Memio. We walked down to Mandalay, carrying all our equipment on us. And of course, it was not actual warfare, so nobody felt the strain of it, and we did it. And but our instructors who were with us were very pleased. They said, "You have nobody fell out of the march. All of us marched. Nobody fell ill, and we did well." So then, when we went to Mandalay, we met Netaji had come there, and then he had a small cabinet meeting, and he told me that now he felt the time had come for us to go back, because there didn't seem much hope of proceeding further. Though he didn't want the INA as such to give up the fight. He wanted all the units which were actually on the front and those who were ready to go to the front to carry on and to put up some fight and halt the British at least as much as they could. And he hoped that somehow the news would get back to India, that the Indian troops in the British Indian Army would also realize that they were being confronted by a band of Indians who were not fighting for any mercenary ends but only for the freedom of the country, and that although they were with the Japanese, they were not puppets of the Japanese. They had independent command and this sort of a thing. So he wanted the troops to keep on fighting, and it was remarkable, except for a very few most of the morale of the troops were very high, and they all were itching back. Those who had come back and those who had been in hospital, once they were cured, they were only itching to go back into the fight. They didn't want to go to the rear or go back to Rangoon or to Singapore or anything like that. Their one idea was, chalo Delhi, and they said, doesn't matter if we die on the way, but we don't want to give up the fight now. And then he ordered that the Rani of Jhansi regiment should go back to Rangoon, and from there he would, those who were recruited in Burma would be sent back to their homes, and those from Malaysia and Singapore would be sent back there. And then about 50, 60 of them, even without telling me, they all signed their names in blood. They cut their vein and dipped their pens in the blood and wrote a letter to Netaji saying, we have come to fight for the liberation of India and not to go back to our homes. So please give us a chance. We don't want to go back. We must go on with the fight. Netaji, of course, was very touched by this, but then he called them all and he said, when I started the Rani of Jhansi regiment and when I took you away from your homes, I gave a pledge to your parents that I would look after you as if you were my own daughters, and that I would see that you went back safely home. Of course, if you had fallen in the field of battle, I know they would have thought it as an honor. But since that has happened, I don't want you to fall prisoners to the Allied forces, because I know that's going to be a very serious thing, and I don't want to put you to that. So you must, that as good soldiers, you have to obey the command of the leader, so you must go back. So they all had to go back, but I told Netaji that since I was also a doctor as well as a soldier, and the hospital in Memio could not be completely evacuated because there were over 100 patients who couldn't be moved. Some had lost their limbs, some had been so debilitated by malaria and dysentery and all that. They just couldn't they couldn't walk, and they would be. So I said, as a hospital, let us remain there, and we'll carry on till we can and see what is in store for us, because we thought, being a hospital, we wouldn't be bothered by enemy planes, and that under the Geneva Convention, that all prisoners in hospitals would be given a different treatment. So I volunteered to stay back. Netaji was very reluctant to let me stay, but I told him, he said, in any case, I said, you haven't made any promise to any of my parents because they are not here, and I didn't have a father, my mother. And I joined on my own, and I was already more mature and older than the other recruits, so I think I must be given this chance. So he agreed, and then I went up to the hospital to work there. But unfortunately, our Red Cross and all that didn't save us. We had cut up all the few red army blankets that we had and put them on the roofs of the hospital. But in spite of that, the hospital was strapped, and many of our patients died, and quite a few of them, on top of their illnesses and their injuries, they suffered more. And among them was the president of the Indian Independence League of Singapore, who had come to the advanced headquarters in Rangoon, and then he came up to Memio to see what supplies were urgently needed in the hospital, and he was about to go back and arrange for those supplies. But in that bombing and strafing, he was very seriously injured. So with all this, there was no chance of our escaping. So we hired bullock carts, and we put these men who couldn't walk in these bullock carts, and those who could just even stagger on, we made them walk. And especially this gentleman, Mr. Yellappa, we put him in a bullock cart and tried to keep him as comfortable as possible. But unfortunately, he received very serious shrapnel injuries on his leg, and we didn't have any anti-tetanus serum with us at all. So after a few days, not immediately, but after about 2 weeks, he developed tetanus, and he used to go into absolute convulsions, but still he was alive. You see, he kept on. So we had to go very, very slowly and go with him. And then finally we went into the Shan states, and there was a place called Inle Lake. We were there, and then we decided that somehow we must get out, because that was a place where probably nobody would have even known that we were there, because we had no communication with the rest of the INA or the headquarters or anything. It was completely cut off. So we thought we must make some contact. And not far from there was a place called Taunji, where there were lots of Indians. They were Punjabi Sikhs mostly. So we sent 2 men there, and they contacted the people there, and they sent us some bullock carts, and we all went to Taunji. But there also they didn't want us to stay too long, because the British were advancing towards Taunji. So we went to a place called Mochi Mines. That's where all these precious stones are mined. And the place was completely evacuated. All the villagers and all that had run away from there. So there were plenty of vacant houses, and some of them had a little store of grains and things like that. So we lived there for a little while. Then we heard that the British were advancing on the road, and some Japanese also, troops which were retreating, came that way. And they said, we are going to now, from there the Salwan River, which separates Myanmar from Thailand, is not far. They said, we are going to cross that river and get into Thailand. Because Thailand, of course, being a neutral country, so we want to take you along with them. But those of us who were able-bodied who could have gone, but we could have never taken the sick man with us. So we decided to stay. We sent away some of our people, those who could march with them and who were not so necessary. At least they could save their lives. And about 6 of us stayed back with this Mr. Yellappa. And then the army started, the British army. So to escape from them, we made a stretcher, put him onto it, and took him into the hills and the jungles. And there were lots of Gurkha villages there. But those people had also fled, so we stayed there. And while we were there, we were captured by the guerrillas, the Force 136. And they captured. Before that, I must tell you, one morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was woken up by a bayonet staring me in the face. And I looked up, and there were some Japanese soldiers. And we couldn't communicate with them, because we knew very little Japanese, and they knew not a word of anything but Japanese. So they took us out, but I was wearing the Burmese dress, lungi and the thing. So I said, no, I must put on my uniform. So I put on my uniform and my cap and all that, and I went. And then they took us outside. And 6 of us, they tied us to 6 trees. And they said, now we are going to call the commander. And so he said, he just couldn't say anything. Then after some time, the commander came. And he had a newspaper in his hand, and he was reading something from that and looking at my face. Then he would read something from that and look. Then he said, Netaji Kaka. That's what they used to call. I said, huh. Then I said, Indo Kokumin Gun. That means Indian National Army in Japanese. So I said, Indo Kokumin Gun ka? I said, huh. Then I said, Indo Kokumin Gun, Nippon Gun. Samas like this, I said that we were allies. So he bowed and he went away. Then he brought a man who knew a little English. And so that man started questioning us. So I told him that we were part of the Indian National Army, and that we were fighting with the help of Japan, and we were the allies of Japan. We were not British forces. And then he told us their story. They were Japanese troops fighting in China who had been cut off and who had walked on the China road and crossed into Burma. So they didn't know what was happening in these places at all. They didn't know about the formation of Indian National Army. They didn't even know that how far the Japanese had progressed in the war. They knew nothing at all. But anyway, they released us, but told us you better run away from here because this place is not at all safe. Because if it's not, the British forces will be coming, or otherwise the Japanese, the next time they won't even give you a chance. They'll just shoot you because this place is full of British guerrillas, and so anybody who's not a Japanese is being shot. So you better go away. So that day we went, and we went higher into the mountains. As far as but we've had to progress very, very slowly. And in the Shan Hills, the jungles are very thick, thick bamboos. I never knew that bamboos went to such a height. They were reaching almost up to the sky, and it was always very dark, and in addition it was raining, but we managed to carry this patient and get there. In the INA, we had an entertainment group also, and they are the ones who composed most of the INA songs, and they had little skits, and they used to go around units entertaining the troops. And we also, the Rani of Jhansi Regiment also formed one, and we had 2 or 3 plays at which we invited Netaji and everybody else, and some of them, of course, were quite serious ones. One was called Azadi Hind, but there were also some humorous ones, and then songs and dances and all that. So that was all the lighter side of our lives. But one night in Maymyo, we were having a performance, and we had invited all the INA units stationed there. Netaji was there, so we were over 1,000 strong that night in that area. And then in the midst of it, the British bombers came. But fortunately, we were able to make it to the trenches, and as their bombing was not, because they'd got information that this camp was there, that Netaji was also there. Because next door to us was a prisoner of war camp, and we suspected that from there was a transmitter sending messages. Anyway, fortunately that their bombing was not so accurate, so we all escaped. But the camp was absolutely reduced to smithereens, and we took out our rifles in time, but we left our other, our haversacks which contained our clothes and all, we left that. And we had nothing, we only had the clothes we were wearing, and so we looked quite a sight, So then from the INA camps they brought us their shirts and trousers, and so we were all wading around in shirts and trousers too loose for us. But those days, cloth was a tremendous problem. We couldn't get it. So then those girls who knew how to stitch, they had to get down to it, and we managed to borrow a machine from somewhere, and we started altering all the clothes as far as we could. So we always used to tell the INA people, you people, you are just soldiers. We have to be tailors sometimes. Now we are nurses and cooks. So we are playing a much bigger role than you are. Because they always used to complain that the food in our camp was better than theirs, and that we must be getting special rations. So I told them, come and see. I'll call the quartermaster. I said, please show him all the rations we got, and nothing, not 1 grain more than you all. But I said, the girls, the women cook, you see, so they are more careful, and they take some trouble and time over it. That's why our food is better.